Hey guys, this is Myleik. This is the My Taught You podcast. I am back. Look at me. Two podcasts back to back in 2 weeks. Today I have a super awesome guest, Dr. Joy Harden Bradford. She is a licensed psychologist in the state of Georgia. You may have heard of her if you visit Therapy for Black Girls, the website, the podcast. But Dr. Joy, can I call you Dr. Joy?
Please, yes.
Okay, so Dr. Joy has a bachelor's in psychology from Xavier University, a master's in vocational rehabilitation counseling from Arkansas State, and a PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Georgia. Her specialties include working with Black women in both individual and couples counseling. Her primary areas of interest include breakup and divorce recovery, depression, work-life balance, relationship skills, and self-esteem improvement. She also has a wealth of knowledge in working with undergraduate and graduate students in areas including procrastination, stress management, and career development. Dr. Joy Harden Bradford is also the founder of Therapy for Black Girls, an online space dedicated to encouraging the mental wellness of Black women and girls, presenting mental health topics in a way that feels more accessible and relevant. All of my followers know that I am big on therapy. So I just want to thank you, not just for being on the podcast, but for the work that you're doing. So welcome, Dr.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. Okay. So I guess I'm going to just dive right in, and I'm just curious to know the difference between a psychologist and a psychotherapist. That's my own personal question. So what is the difference?
So a psychologist is a protected term. Usually we are licensed by each state.
Okay.
So you can sometimes hear that term used interchangeably. So some psychologists will call themselves psychotherapists, but typically the psychotherapist term is used for people who may be like clinical social workers or licensed professional counselors, other types of degrees.
Okay, got it. So I want to talk about you for a little bit, and I just want to know, how did you get into this field of profession? Like, how do you feel you were called to do this work?
I think that lots of therapists have this story of kind of being the person in their circles who like everybody goes to for problems, right?
Right.
So I feel like I have been that person in a lot of my circles. And really feel like I've always just developed like a really keen sense of like how to listen to people and really connect with them. So I think all of those skills that were innately built into me have helped me to become a really good psychologist as well. Okay.
So, I'm so glad that like I came up a little bit in a time, when I went to college, I don't even, text messaging wasn't a thing, but now with social media, you and I had lunch. So for those of you who know my rule, Dr. Joy and I did sit and have lunch in Atlanta. And so I don't know how people sort of get over breakups, because it used to sort of be where you would break up and, maybe you deleted their number. You didn't remember it. You just didn't have it. But now you can pretty much see someone or hear from them forever. So how do you think social media has impacted breakups these days?
You are so right about that, Myleik. I mean, I think that it is almost impossible to kind of cut some of those ties like it used to be, because now you can kind of still passively be following what's going on with your ex, right? Like if you're still following their Facebook page or following them on Twitter or Instagram. So it does feel like it's harder to cut off some of those connections, which does make it harder to then get over the heartbreak of, ending the relationship, which is why I always recommend that one of the very first steps is to cut all virtual ties with the ex as well as in-person ties.
That was my next question of like, what could you do socially to move things along? Basically just unfollow.
Yes, unfollow. Sometimes you need to take a break altogether, right? Because if it's been like a very public relationship, if there are lots of pictures and, people are always tagging you, sometimes even just unfollowing is not enough. Sometimes you have to just take a break altogether to kind of get it out of your system, so to speak. And then maybe come back. Sometimes it's really hard for people to do that. So I will do things like suggest them changing their password and giving like their best friend the password so that they're not tempted to log back in and, do a little little bit of looking at the ex's profile. But it is a really hard step for people because I think because we have now developed into such a social media heavy culture, that feels like a very intimate part of the relationship, like the relationship that you have in person with your partner, but also like the public relationship. So it's almost like two different kinds of breakups. Like now you're also having to share it with everybody in public.
I didn't even think of that. That like, you know, now it's the, I don't know, is it shame or something? Like, okay, I already have the pain of the breakup and now I have this. And I always joke about how you sort of know when all of a sudden the pictures go away and then there's like the quotes come up and it's just like, uh-oh, you know, which I think prompts a lot of people to not. I know a lot of public people that I know don't like to share who they're dating for that very reason. I have a lot of listener questions. So I put out a Insta story yesterday saying that I would be talking to a psychologist, and my inbox was flooded yesterday. So there is no way that we will be able to cover everything, but I try to pick some questions that I think would be relevant to many. But before we get into that, Dr. Joy, I want to really just see how you feel about when I first started therapy. I would say this August will make 6 years that I've been going to therapy. And I tell people that I have gone much like I would go to the gym to stay fit. You know, I think that sometimes we feel like, well, if I have to be in crisis or something has to be deeply wrong. And I really just go sort of for like maintenance, you know, to make sure that everything up there emotionally that I'm on track. But do you think that the stigma is sort of fading for therapy? I think I heard Jay-Z say he was going to therapy. Like all of these, you know, celebs are coming out and saying that they're going. And when I started going, I was like, how can any successful person sort of make it without therapy? But I think it behooves us all to sort of check in once in a while. But do you think that the topic of therapy is fading in the Black community? The taboo of it?
Right. I do think, I mean, that's why I'm so grateful that you are so open to talking about therapy, because I think for a lot of people listening to your podcast was the first time they've heard like, oh, it's totally okay to go to therapy, not in crisis. Right. And I feel like a lot of high profile people are talking about it. So Jay-Z, the ladies from Another Round podcast talk about it pretty openly. They talk about it openly on The Read. Like lots of different very public figures are talking about their experience with therapy and how helpful it's been. And I do think that has taken away some of the stigma, because it's not just in crisis, right? Like it's actually much better if you can get into a therapist before the crisis happens. That way we may be able to prevent some of the crisis stuff, right? Yes. So I like the analogy of likening it to the way that we go to the gym, because it is very similar to that.
Yes. I didn't even, I guess in a lot of ways I was naive. And when I started going to therapy, it was so good for me that I just could not be quiet about it. I was just like, you know, a lot of skills that no one taught me. And I think sometimes and you feel free to chime in at any point. I feel like we put ourselves up to a standard of like, you know, how should someone know how to handle trauma? You know, it's like, how would you know how to deal with a situation without a professional's help? But we seem to think that like we should know how to deal with a breakup, you know, like I should know how to move on. And that's just not something that we always know how to do. And so when I started going to therapy and I found myself less angry, you know, I don't even think I realized how upset I used to be all the time, and everything would upset me. You know, I go through line, the cashier would upset me. I was so angry. And once I just got this toolkit, you know, I love some things that my therapist taught me, that like sort of, is it true challenge. I used to be making up stuff like, oh, so-and-so is doing, it's like, is that true? Can you prove that? You know? But a lot of us will do that. And so I think the most burning question I've gotten about therapy is, how do I choose a therapist?
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. And
Mm-hmm.
it's hard, right? Because it's not a one size fits all. So
No.
that's also the beauty of therapy. And I think what can make it really powerful, and a great tool for a lot of people is that really what you're talking about is just a healing relationship with another person, right? And
Ooh.
so in any kind of relationship, we want to make sure that it's a good fit. We want to make sure that we really feel seen by this person, that we feel comfortable talking to this person. And so the downside of that, though, is that you may have to go through a couple of therapists before you
Mm-hmm.
find the right one. And I know a lot of people hate to hear that because it's like, I don't want to keep opening up this can of worms to these
Yes,
new
yes.
people, right? Like that doesn't feel good. But
Mm-hmm.
I think once you find somebody who is a really good fit for you, then you will realize it was all worth it, even if you have to try a couple.
Okay, I think that's fair. I feel like I got lucky in that a friend recommended a therapist to me, and I went to her, and it was like, okay, this is good. But I think the next question I want to ask you, because a lot of us don't know, and I didn't know this either, is that I didn't know what to expect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that expectation management is huge. So, it takes all this kind of courage sometimes to get it together and go to therapy. And then you leave after the first session and you're like, I'm not healed. Like, or I'm not, I'm not better. So what should one expect during the first few sessions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
How.
that's a great point that you brought up because you
Mhm.
definitely, well, I won't say definitely, but it's likely that you will not feel better after your first session. As a matter
Right.
of fact, you could feel worse,
Thank you.
because
Yeah.
because the therapist may ask some questions that kind of uncover some things that you have been really trying to push down, not wanting to deal with for a very long time. So you may
Right.
actually feel a little worse after going to your first session. But
Right.
it's likely that your first session and maybe even your first couple are just lots of questions, right? Because you're coming in
Yes.
with all these years of whatever has been going on and we're just getting to know you, right? And
Right.
so,
Right.
we're trying to understand like, okay, what's been happening? How, what kind of symptoms are you presenting with? What kinds of treatment things are we thinking may be helpful for you? We're really just trying to get a lot of background in those first couple of sessions. And we're also trying to assess if you are going to be a good fit for us, right? So
Ooh, okay.
as much as you are choosing, we are too, right? Because we're all not,
Mhm.
um, like, we have licenses, so there are some general things that most therapists can do, but lots of us also have particular specialties.
Right.
So, if you come to me and it looks like there's something that you're dealing with that I really feel like I'm probably not the best person that's going to be able to help you, then I
Mhm.
may say to you after a couple of those first sessions, like, hey, from what you're describing, it sounds like so and so may actually be a better fit for you. Would you be open to a referral? Because we
Okay.
also don't want to get you into a situation where we don't really feel like we can help you.
Okay. And that's the
Yeah.
thing. That's the thing that I wanted to talk about, because I know that you have the directory, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
awesome. And the therapy is, I mean, in the directory is therapyforblackgirls.com.
Mm-hmm. Slash directory.
Okay. So for those who are looking for therapists of color, that is where they can find them. But I guess a personal question is, how does, like, so there'll be these specialties, right? And it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I specialize in this and this and that. But what if I don't know that I'm depressed? Is there a way that I would know that I was depressed to then come to you? Like, what are some signs or symptoms that, because I don't know, I was reading in my research that sometimes we'll think that it's being laziness or just we're not motivated. It's like
Mm-hmm.
when actually we're depressed, like we're beating ourselves up because we can't get anything done. But the truth is, it is because we're depressed and not because we're lazy.
Right. Right.
So I don't
Yeah.
know if you can help me with that. Like, how could I go about finding out what kind of therapist I may need?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think for a lot of people, when they feel like something is off, or like, okay, I feel like I should be able to do more, or I'm noticing this drastic change in my behavior. A lot of people's first thing is to go online, right? We Google
Mm-hmm.
everything,
Mm-hmm.
and so you will find like lots of quizzes online, like, oh, depression symptoms, or if you put in lack of motivation or something, it's likely that some kind of quiz or something will come up. But you could also just, look through maybe the directory or wherever you're looking through if you're wanting to use your insurance, if you get a list from your insurance company. You could also just start looking at therapist websites. So I am excited that therapists have gotten a lot better at being able to kind of just speak to their clients in their websites as opposed to using a whole bunch of jargon. So you may go to a therapist website and you will see them describe like, hey, have you noticed that you're not as motivated as you used to be, or you don't want to work out as much as you used to? Like, you will sometimes be able to see yourself in a therapist website like, oh my gosh, I am struggling with that. Okay. So I think visiting therapist websites can also help you to get a sense of who may be a good fit for you depending on what you're struggling with.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. That is a good idea. And I always joke with my therapist. She's like, your therapist is coming to the modern age, my league. I'm like, thank you. Thank you. It's like, get fancy, because it's like, you gotta, now is I feel like it's such a private sort of thing, but I feel like you can put yourself out a little bit so that people can find you.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, I'm going to get to some of these questions. And so, the first one, a young lady says, could you please ask for them to touch on love addiction? And I don't know if that's a thing or not. this is what the question says, I sometimes wonder how much of the ride or die mentality, particularly when not reciprocated, that we have placed value on as Black women comes from a deeper place than low self-esteem or loneliness. Specific question: how does love addiction impact staying in bad relationships or getting over them once they've ended? Is that how, this ride or die mentality? I think it's a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it can be related to a lot of different factors. So I think lots of us have been socialized to feel like any kind of partner is better than no partner. Okay. Right. And then when you add on top of that, this whole like statistics about how many single eligible Black men there are for women, and the numbers are not necessarily in your favor or whatever, then people I think sometimes make decisions from a place of desperation, which are not the healthiest.
Okay. And how?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, I fell for that too. I will admit that I fell into that fear of like, I may never have anyone because I'm quote unquote too ambitious, or someone will be intimidated by me, but how is there a way that we can feel less desperate?
Well, I think being able to put words to it is a good place to start, right? Like, you don't want to kind of not know that that's what's going on in the background. So I think some awareness for yourself around like, okay, what is fueling me to make those decisions? But I think related to the whole topic of love addiction, so that's not necessarily like a diagnostic term. That's more something that people are like using like just colloquially, but it is related to attachment style. So, based on like your early relationships with parents or caregivers, a lot of that does determine how we act and react in certain relationships. So if we have had really secure attachments and secure relationships with our early caregivers, that dictates that we may have more secure relationships with, romantic partners and friendships later in life. But if we feel like, like our needs weren't met as children and what we call insecure attachment, then that also dictates us maybe not finding partners, or sometimes finding partners who even replicate that same kind of pattern, because we're not used to our needs being met. So sometimes you will go out and search, and not even necessarily on a conscious level, but because it's something you're familiar with, you are tending to attract and end up in relationships with people who do those same kinds of things.
Everybody's always like, you will date your father. And it's like, well, that's not, it's true, but it's not, but it's like, that's what you know. So it's probably not shocking that you end up, I think that was the biggest sort of like aha moment for me in therapy was repetition compulsion. And when I was like, whoa, how sort of like wanting to change the story, you know, trying to change my
Right.
dad through current relationships. And I'm like, this man is living his life and I'm over here and I'm over here on repeat over here. That was like the biggest aha moment for me. But I'm going to keep going because I have a lot of questions. And this one is, I thought it was pretty interesting. This young lady says, I'm more on the introverted side and I haven't had much dating experience. I'm in my early 30s and I waited until my late 20s to lose my virginity. And I had only had sex with one guy until quite recently. I haven't known him long and I'm surprised with myself that I actually slept with someone I wasn't in a relationship with. Not my thing. I find that being overweight is a major insecurity for me in the realm of dating and sex. In the world of online dating, I'm never sure if a dude will be disappointed when he meets me. I was so not confident when I recently had sex. I think if I could find a way to be more accepting of my body and have confidence that a guy isn't judging me, I'd have better dates, relationships, and sex. For some reason, I always have this fear in the back of my mind that guys who like me won't stick around once they find someone who's not fat. I know that sounds unreasonable. I've just had several experiences where men have clearly liked me but not pursued anything serious with me due to my size. Besides the size issues, being more on the introverted side makes it difficult to build relationships with people. Once I know someone, I'm fine, but that period of getting to know someone is rough for me because I never know what to say or do. I never know what the balance should be in between myself to say, do more or falling back so I don't seem needy or clingy. Also, so many of the men my age want to text all of the time now. I think I'm better at phone and in-person conversations because despite my introverted tendencies, my personality has the opportunity to come out as long as I'm comfortable. Any tips or suggestions are greatly appreciated. So it wasn't really a question, but I guess what I got, and this is, I'm just thinking as normally I answer the questions, but I think I feel like you probably got all the real juice, but I may even jump in and give my opinion. But what do you think about this? Is that, you know, it sounds like late bloomer in terms of dating, insecure about her weight. I guess another topic is guys wanting to text more these days. I feel like we could talk about sort of all of those things.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, that letter definitely was a lot. There were a lot of layers, you know, like a lot of complexities, it feels like. Right. And, you know, to try to peel through all of that. And what I really would suggest, I'm hoping that this person is working with a therapist. And if not, then I would suggest that they do. Because it sounds like there's a lot of energy around like insecurities about body, some abandonment stuff. So this whole idea that people will leave, and that could come from somewhere else. I mean, it sounds like there is also some previous experience, right? But we don't know that that is necessarily related to like any body stuff. But it sounds like at least she's thinking there is. So I would want her to maybe explore more. Like, is there, like you said, your therapist told you, is this true? Is there really any evidence to support this? But also, working through her own insecurities related to her body, you know, because when we feel insecure, then we project certain things. And so, because we're projecting certain things, then we perceive things sometimes not as they really are, but how we're seeing them, which isn't always accurate. So I really would hope that she would talk with a therapist to try to kind of work through a lot of that. But then the whole texting thing, I mean, I feel like a lot of people are doing more texting, but it's okay if you don't want to, right? Like that's the beauty of us being able to make our own choices. If you are somebody who likes more in-person things, then you go to more in-person things that allow you to talk to people in person. You don't have to choose somebody who does prefer to text. You know, you can wait until you find somebody who likes more in-person contact.
I think it's difficult because I know even when I was dating, there's that period where, and I mean, I think I probably just aged out of this where I'm like, listen, I'm not playing this game of, you know, how many times should I call or how long do I wait to be called back? And, you know, the texting, it's such a crazy thing because technology, you know, you would call someone, they weren't home, you left a message, you waited until they called you back. Now you call, they don't pick up, you can text, you know, it's just this thing of, I feel like there's no, air or just time allowed, between things. And I used to be super obsessive about stuff like that. I call you, you don't call me back, it's over. I would have made up a story of what you were doing and why you hadn't called me back. And so I just think that it gets tricky. But now I think it's okay to say, I prefer phone calls, and if if the person is saying, if the person's like, well, I don't like talking on the phone, then that's not your person, and
Right.
to not feel like you have to change yourself because they prefer to text, and I just think that that's what I feel like we do as women a ton, is like, well, if feeling like, how do we adjust to men? But I am curious to know what you think. And now this has just hit me, there are all this think like a man madness, and I feel like there's so many people telling women how they should be acting in relationships. I just want to know what you think about this.
Yeah, I don't really like any of that stuff. Well, first of all, it's mostly not women. So I have an issue with that, right? Like that people who are not even women coming to tell women how they should be doing. But I also think that doesn't leave any room for like our individual experiences and history. Like what will work for me will be totally different for you. So, these generic descriptions and prescriptions about how we should be to date and all that stuff mostly does not work.
You're not going for it.
No, I'm not a fan.
I agree because people are doing, just because you are a married couple, you don't have like you say, you don't have the prescription for this individual. This question came in and I thought it was pretty interesting and juicy. So I definitely want to know what you think. So, young lady writes me and says, for the past 1 year, she's been in a relationship with a guy from her country. They live in the UK. She was introduced by this guy's cousin. When we first started getting to know each other, I started telling him about my life and past relationships. He said he does not like discussing past relationships because the past is in the past. He says we should concentrate on the future now and what we have together. Because she's friends with his cousin, she knows a lot about his past relationships. He's been cheated on before, but he doesn't know much about mine. He knows the names of 2 of my exes and that's it. Recently, we started having issues because my past keeps creeping back up. Those are his words, not mine. One time we were together and my phone rang. It was one of my exes calling. My boyfriend went crazy and started saying, why is my ex calling me? What do we have going on? She tried to tell him. She says, if he would actually let me tell him about my past, he'd know that this ex was my friend first. And we realized that dating wouldn't work. So we went back to being friends. There's no romantic connection. He wouldn't hear any of it and tried to break up with me. We eventually got back together, but he brings it up every time we argue. Anyway, 6 days ago, he came over to my place to help me get rid of my old bed because I was getting a new one. When he tried to dismantle the bed, he saw, quote unquote, something underneath the bed that belonged to one of my exes. I had no idea it was there. I have lived in that flat for 4 years now, and this was my first time changing my bed. At first, he accused me of cheating. Then he broke up with me and went home. I tried explaining to him that I lived in my flat for 4 years and dated before I met him a year ago, that I also was not aware of something being under the bed because I've gotten rid of all remittance of past relationships. He then stopped accusing me of cheating, but broke up with me anyway because my past keeps creeping up. My leak, I'm devastated. This is the first relationship that I've been in that I've been treated right. See, if I wasn't doing this with you and I was doing my regular breakdown, I would be like, highlight, underline. This is the first relationship that you've been treated right. He's been supportive in everything I do and always puts me first. He's introduced me to his family and calls my mom often to check on her. My question is it fair, normal for your partner to not want to know anything regarding your past relationships, but has an issue whenever something from your past comes up? Restless in the UK.
Ooh,
that was a good juicy one.
Yeah, that's a lot going on. So I'm first very sorry to hear that you're devastated, right? Like breakups suck. There's just no easy way around that. And I, can imagine that must be really, really painful, especially when it doesn't sound like there's anything that you actually did. but you also already know that he's coming in with this history of being
Mm-hmm.
cheated on, and so a lot of his reactions are actually sparked from that and have nothing to do with you, which of course is unfair to you, but I do think that that's likely what's going on. And so now
Mm-hmm.
that you know this, once you can kind of get through some of the devastation, I think you have to, even if you guys, are able to get back together, is this something that you're okay with? Because he likely will continue to have these kinds of reactions when things from your
Right.
past come up.
I'm also sad that she's devastated, but I think that that was something that would have that stuck out to me, is that this is the first relationship that I've been treated right. And I don't know, I
Mm-hmm.
think, like, for me, I would have said something like that in my past, and it would have stemmed from, this is the first time that, you know, a guy, was, let's just say, he was faithful, or he got back to me in a sufficient amount of time. And I would have, like, there would be maybe two or three things that I had never experienced in a relationship, that I really wanted. And then I got it. I've been with a guy who didn't cheat on me and who was a person of his word and took me out on dates and all that kind of stuff. But he still wasn't the person for me, because he wasn't, ambitious. He wasn't, he didn't meet some of these other needs. And so I would go out on a limb and say, he's not treating you right. He's not treating you right. And Dr. Joy, you could probably cut me up on this one, but I will tell you, this is how I am. This is how I am when it comes to dating. I think I know my limit, and I've said to anybody that I'm dating in this new post therapy, my leak, if you leave today, because I feel like sometimes guys will do that. They get mad, they want to leave, they hang up at the phone, and then
Mm-hmm.
now you are sitting around waiting to hear from them, and now they have all the control, right? And it's just like, F that. If you go, don't come
Mm-hmm.
back. Period. Because I'm not dealing with that. Because I feel like if I allow you to do that once, you'll continue to do it. And especially if it's in the early stages of a relationship. Like, if we in like month 1, 2, 3 and you pull that, get going. But I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if that's
Mm-hmm.
too, I'm probably too good. I'm probably too good at moving on. But I just don't like that, because I don't know. And so it's like, I always say what.
Well, it is
Mm-hmm.
very telling, right? It is very, like, not, because you could also, like, if you just need space because you feel like a situation
Okay.
has gotten too heated, you could say, you know what, I need the weekend to think about this, but let's check in about this
Okay.
again on Monday. You could get space from whatever is happening without completely
Okay.
leaving the relationship. So I do think that that is a very telling and concerning
Mm-hmm.
sign, right? That he just checks out and, like, it's
Mm-hmm.
done with you whenever, he feels like his feelings have been hurt. So, I would be careful, because likely he will pop up at some point again, right? Like, I feel like exes always kind of pop up in a couple of months to kind of see
Mm-hmm.
what's going on. So, I think you have to make the decision for yourself whether this kind of behavior is something that you're going to be okay with, because I would want to hear what would be different once he does
Okay.
try to come back. Like, what would convince you that anything would be different even if he does try to get back
Right.
into your life?
Ugh. Oh gosh. I don't like him, but I'm gonna err on your side, Dr. Joy, and be more open. And I do find that, like, therapists are usually the door. It's like, I feel like when you go to therapy, it's like you're not gonna get an answer, but it's just like, I'm gonna help you think about some things versus tell you what to do or not do.
Right.
Where me, I'm your friend that's like,
Exactly.
no, girl, no, no. It's like, and this is, I know, I'm almost afraid to say this before I get into my next question. I'm very afraid to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, that I'm triggered, I guess is the word, by the whole sort of like, this Beyonce Jay-Z taking you back tour thing, because it feels very
Mm.
ride or die. Um, it feels, like I don't know. I just want women to feel like they have more options. We're not even going to talk about it. Don't write me. Don't be me. I'm just saying that I'm triggered by it. I'm triggered by it, y'all, and we can talk about it some other time. But we're not going to get beat up over this today. Um, okay. Next question is and let me check the time, make sure I don't wear you down. Um, Currently in my first relationship ever at a late age, very late bloomer here. And I feel like I have no clue what I'm doing. Recently, I've discovered that I'm highly insecure. I keep having dreams that my lover breaks up with me, rejects, and cheats on me. But in real life, he's the sweetest, most patient guy and says I'm the perfect girl for him and that he loves me every day. But I don't feel like it. I might have to do with just feeling like this relationship landed in my lap on accident and I don't deserve it. Being someone who has never really been the apple of anyone's eye before, So I guess that has made my self esteem not the best. How do I feel better about myself and my standing in this relationship? Mm.
Again, a lot to
Yes.
unpack there. So of course, my initial answer will be a therapist will be amazing to talk to, because you're seeing some things that to me indicate like what has been going on throughout your life that you've not felt like the apple of anybody's eye. Which, like, okay, what's going on with your friendships? What's going on with family? It just kind of is giving me the feel of like, I don't ever feel like I've been special. And so, you do have to be careful because if you're looking for your partner to kind of give you all of that, then what happens if something should happen with this relationship? Then do you go back to not feeling special, right? So we do want to go into relationships with our own already sense of like, I'm valuable, I have worth. My worth doesn't come from being in this relationship with the partner. I think another good book, a good book to check out would be Self-Compassion by Dr. Kristen Neff, because it really gets into some of this, like how can you be more gentle with yourself? How can you, be kind to yourself in the same ways that we're typically kind to our friends, but some of us struggle with doing that for ourselves. So I think that would also be a good book to check out, but I do really think a therapist would help you to kind of unpack some of all of these insecurities and self-esteem stuff.
Yeah. Okay. And then I have a sort of a family question, which I wrote the lady back like, wow, I feel like I could have written this, but she says, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on cutting ties with toxic family members. I feel like that's easily one of the hardest things for us. But she says, I suppose that I'm loosely estranged from one of my older brothers, considering that I only speak to him when forced to interact with him during the holidays and the rare occasion that we are both at our parents' house at the same time. She said she's going to try to make it brief, but her brother has struggled with what doctors think is bipolar disorder and or personality disorder for most of his adult life and another autoimmune disorder for his entire life. This has not only caused him to have a pill addiction, but the bipolar illness caused him to have very destructive behavior. He has been verbally and physically abusive towards me on and off for almost the past decade. The off part was mostly when I was not in contact with him, living out of our home state, or just avoiding him. Some of the worst incidents include him punching me in my face in public in front of our nieces and nephews, posting my picture on Facebook with a caption saying that I have an STD. I don't, FYI. And the last major incident was throwing rocks at my car while I was trying to drive away. Not to mention he has had countless physical altercations with my father, been verbally abusive towards my mother as well. The last time we met to reconcile, it ended with him not owning up to anything that was his fault, then threatening to kill me if I ever came back to his house. He invited me over. I did not show up unannounced. How do I get rid of my anger about things that I know I'll never receive an apology for? Last summer, he texted me saying he was sorry for anything he did to contribute to the breakdown of our relationship, but that's not actually owning up to anything. Now that he is recovering and getting his life together, my parents are happy, but I don't think it's fair that his past just gets forgotten. She says, I'm struggling with a few things here. I have a great therapist who says I need to completely stay away from my brother, but I'm struggling with the guilt. He is my brother, and I don't know how or if I will ever be able to just completely let him go. However, I'm still angry about all of the things that have happened that I never received an apology for. I'm not close with my other siblings either. I'm not currently in a relationship, and I think it can be lonely to go through life without having a relationship with my siblings, especially as my parents age. If I'm truly going to cut ties with my brother, how can I grieve this relationship? Will the guilt ever go away? I just want to heal from this trauma in the best way that I can and not continue to carry this hurt and anger. Thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm glad that she is working with a therapist, because it does sound like that is a lot to manage. And I do think, unfortunately, lots of us have these kinds of stories where, there are family members who just have been outright abusive to us, and there's still this belief that we have to kind of continue a relationship with them because they're family. And so I think we have to be careful of taking that narrative too far, because, just because you're born to the same parents and raised in the same house, like that in some ways is like the end of where that story is. Like, you're still two different people with different personalities, different things going on. And so if this were a stranger, you, I'm sure, would not even be considering whether you would entertain continuing in this relationship, right? And so I do think, and of course it's hard. It's not an easy thing. So I don't want you to think I'm minimizing like the guilt and the pain that exists with this, but it is possible. Other people have done it. There are lots of books around it because it is such an unfortunately common thing. But I think that the whole thing is kind of leaning into the guilt and allowing yourself to feel that, right? Because I think you're probably putting a lot of pressure on yourself to like wipe away that feeling, like, oh, I just don't want to feel it. But if you allow yourself to feel the guilt, it becomes a little more comfortable. It doesn't always hurt as bad as it's probably hurting right now. And so I think a part of what you're struggling with too is that you haven't actually made the decision. Making the decision and then figuring out, okay, this is how I'm going to work around it. This is how I may still navigate holidays or whatever. I think once you've made a decision and then can come up with a plan, that may help you to feel a little better about your decision. But you may always have some pain related to not having the relationship you wanted with your brother, right? Like, there's nothing abnormal with that. But I do think you have to choose self in this case. You have to think about what my life would look like if I did allow him to come back into my life and I'm not sure of what would happen. You do have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself first.
I don't talk a ton about my family here on the podcast out of respect for them, but I think I have shared here that I have been estranged. A lot of people think that I'm an only child, but I have an older brother, 4 years older than me, and I've been estranged from him for close to a decade. And I think you made some really good points about, this is my only sibling, and I have felt that way too. I tried multiple times. Like, I've always just, I would be jealous of other people's, sibling relationships. But after, it was just always, anytime we would get together or interact, it would end in tears, or it would just feel too heavy. And I think, like I really appreciate you saying it's making the decision. That's the part that makes it hard. But then once I decided, okay, I just can't do this, then, I kind of just set up a plan or around how I would deal with things. And so it was just a thing where I kind of communicated to my parents that, like, this is how I would prefer to do holidays. I'll come first, or, I'll come during this time, but I just don't want that anymore. And I don't think it's not as bad as I think some people thought it was. And I find myself happier that it's just lower drama. There's nothing happening. There's no he said, she said, because I wasn't there, and that used to be a big, big thing of like, oh, he said you did this and this. I'm like, now that's done. But you'll be surprised that people will. I found that, like, my family would respect me saying, I'm not coming to this, or I'm coming first or early or within these hours. And that, if he comes, I'm going to go. I'm not going to make a scene. I'm just going to go. And I have felt better about that. But that is tough. And I think that is making the decision. But I guess my question for you is, you said lean into the guilt. How does one do that? Is it just allowing yourself to feel bad about it?
Yeah, because I think sometimes we get really upset at ourselves because we have, like, what of course is a natural reaction to this, right? Like, I think some of that of course it feels bad to have to remove yourself from this relationship that society and everybody else tells us like we should have. So I think some of it is really just allowing yourself the space to feel whatever that emotion is and then figure out how to deal with it. You don't have to get rid of the emotion. The emotion is natural. It's a totally natural response to have, but fighting against it is what causes a lot of the tension.
Okay. So I want to talk about two more things, and then I won't hold you. I think we'll get close to our hour. But I thought this was a good question. She says 2 separate therapists have suggested medication for depression. I don't want to become reliant for the rest of my life, which is why I haven't started. Is there a healthy routine that can be established? What are your thoughts?
So my guess is that the other therapists have also talked about alternatives. So they likely have talked about probably your sleep regimen, what's going on with your exercise, what's going on with your diet. If you haven't gotten like a panel workup from like your primary care doctor, that may also be a good option to try, just to rule out anything else that may be going on. But if 2 separate therapists have suggested medication, then I would encourage, so I can be the third therapist, to at least encourage you to maybe have a conversation with a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner or whoever prescribes in your state, just to get the information, because I think sometimes people are just really confused about what medication does and how long they'll have to be on it and all of these things, and that if you had a conversation with the prescriber, a lot of those fears could be remedied because you would get the real information. So I think it's worth at least a conversation. But likely if your therapist have said that they're likely seeing like significant difficulties with your functioning that they think would be improved by medication. So I would encourage you to at least have the conversation with a prescriber who could give you some information about it.
Big fear. One of my closest childhood friend is a pharmacist, and she was just saying that, we have this huge fear of medication when in many cases it can be helpful.
Oh, it's super helpful. It's super helpful. I mean, a lot of people now, sometimes it takes, again, just like finding the right therapist. Sometimes you have to try multiple medications to find the one that is good for you. But once people can find a good medication, lots of people see drastic improvement in their like mood and their ability to function and the ways, that depression may be impacting their lives. So that's probably why the therapists are suggesting it, is that you likely would see some improvement if you tried it.
I feel before I even get into my last topic, I want to talk about the suicides that, I think they said that we were at the highest rate ever. And with the recent news, and I was watching CNN and I felt like they keep talking about like noticing the signs, but some people say that they didn't see any signs at all. Anything, and if this is not something that can happen, in a few minutes, I understand, but is there something that we can do to help our friends? Because they're always like, check on your strong friends and this and that. What can we do?
Yeah, I mean, and I think you can just check in on all of your friends, but isn't that what friendship is, right? Like, I think, so, making sure that you're engaged with the people who mean something to you, not just your strong friends, but all of your friends. But I think why people were saying that is because, typically the strong, quote unquote, friend may have developed more of a mask. And so even if something is going on, you may not know it. But, the ugly truth and like the really hopeless piece of like all of this related to suicides is that a lot of people, once they have decided that they're going to end their life, will not tell you anything, right? And that's the scary piece, because they've made this decision and they don't want anybody to stop them. But I don't think that means that we don't continue to check on our friends, or if we see like drastic changes in mood and like, your friend was always coming out with you and now they don't anymore. Like, I definitely think we ought to be asking questions like, hey, is everything okay? Do we need to talk about something, and offering support when we see things happening. But, if somebody has decided that they are going to end their life, unfortunately, there is not a lot we can do sometimes.
That makes perfect sense. So, you have this phenomenal podcast that I feel like everybody is, I see talking about, and that I got a little envious of like, oh, I wish that was my podcast. I want to talk about therapy all the time. So, and I was just kind of going through some of the episodes. What has been one of the most popular episodes for you, Dr. Joy? Like, what is the thing that people want to, if people who may not have heard of you and who are getting to know you on this podcast, when they hop over to your channel, what's something that people that you just are like, this was a poppin' topic?
Yeah, there are lots of them, but I think the one that comes up most often is the conversation around boundaries.
That was my final
so there was an episode.
So that's it. Yeah, I was like, I was going to end on that. Yeah, because that is okay. So it's boundaries. Let's talk about boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, and I feel like it is becoming a bit of a buzzword that sometimes we don't always know what it means. But we see it kind of thrown around a lot. But boundaries basically are like your invisible and sometimes very well stated limits about what's okay for you and what's not okay for you. What's okay, how is it, what kinds of things are okay to do to you and what kinds of things are not, what kinds of actions are okay in your presence and what kinds of things are not. What are all of the values that you hold in place that you then communicate to other people so that they are showing that they are respectful of your space.
Right. But I feel like people really struggle with those altogether. Maybe you have a family, and that was one of the questions that I got, is that this young lady asked me, how do you set boundaries for yourself, especially familial? This is something I struggle with often. Is it right to sacrifice a personal goal for helping family first? And so I was just like, girl, I'm still in therapy because ... boundaries. Because I'll get good in one area, all of a sudden it's like, okay, I got this, but then I don't have it in some others, and I feel like having a child really helped me in terms of like getting some familial boundaries better stated, if you will. But it's, I am so tough, but boundaries are hard as hell. Like, they are just hard. It's like, how do you say something to your mom or dad? How do you, the guilt that you may have around, a lot of us, I think I read an article that said that in the Black community, Black kids are expected to take care of their family. You become an adult, you take care of your parents. Where in other cultures, white culture, if you will, Caucasian, I don't know, people wouldn't call that culture, but in Caucasian society, the parents are expected to take care of the kid forever. So there's always this guilt of like, can I do things and not take care of them, which I'm pretty sure you probably hear often. But it's difficult. Any tips to help us with family boundaries?
Yeah, those are typically the most difficult. And we are talking about like generational wealth. I mean, there's a real reason why that has happened the way it has, right? Like, lots of our lines down in our families didn't have wealth. So there is no way to necessarily support you. Whereas in other families, there is money that exists. So it developed for a reason, but I do think we need to look at, okay, if you want to do some of that, is there a way that you can do that without sacrificing yourself? I mean, so not just like, a slight inconvenience, but sacrifice, right? Like that to me is a big word, and so I don't know that you should be sacrificing yourself to be able to take care of other people, because who's then going to take care of you when you need it? So I do think you have to look at, okay, what can I do feasibly in help without actually sacrificing my own goals? But I do think, because of some of the, relationships that and this happens a lot with like moms and daughters. And a lot of times because they have not had the healthiest relationships with our grandmothers. And in some ways it's like a passed on kind of dynamic that we have to break at some point. But there is a lot of like guilt and like manipulating, like, okay, I want you to do this thing and I'm your mother. So you have to, and the Bible kind of reinforces this whole honor thy mother and father.
Yes, and thy days will be long.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, but I don't know that honor has to mean sacrifice. It can mean helping when you can and being respectful and, doing all the things that you feel like are within limits. But if you feel like you can't do it, then you just can't do it. You don't have to break your back to try to, to kind of do things for other people when you just don't have the time or the energy or the space to be able to do it.
And I think, I always joke, in therapy, she goes, I'm going to give you a gift. And it was the gift of let me think about it. And when I tell you that I have found that like using that phrase, most people kind of just go away, hey, Miley, can you buy me this or can I have that? And you're like, can I think about it? And, it's like, usually if they come, usually they know what that means. That's like a really nice no for those of us who are still afraid to say no sometimes. Like I still don't feel just coming straight out and being like, nah. But I'm like, hey, can I think about it? And it's like, okay. And then if they come back, it's like, I thought about it. And, just because you have money doesn't mean that you have to give it away, and doesn't mean that you can't be saving it for your own rainy day. And like you said, who's going to take care of you? So Dr. Joy, as we get ready to wrap up this podcast, and I'm going to, I feel like I'm making this like the church altar call, for for those who are out there, who are still on the fence, is there anything that you can maybe share with my listeners? And I feel like a lot of them have gotten so comfortable with just going to therapy. Anything you could say to sort of like help ease their fears, like, make it accessible, maybe a quick how to get started. Can you share with us?
Yeah, well, I actually have a guide to getting started, and so I put together a little package for your listeners. So because I figured a lot of people, may want to do it. They hear you talk about it. It sounds interesting, but they don't know how to quite get started, and it's a huge task. So I put together a little guide. So it's the guide to getting started with therapy. So if you go to therapyforblackgirls.com/myleek, then you can sign up to get that. Get a little package.
That's awesome. And I didn't even know you did that. And now that is so, thank you so much, because I feel like that is the hardest thing of like, people may know they want to go, but they don't even, and I only went because someone literally was like, here's her number, give her a call. Otherwise, I don't even know what I would have done. Okay. So you put that together for us. Therapy for Black Girls /myleek. Yes. Okay. And then tell us how to find you everywhere. And like I told you the other day, I happened to walk past your office going to therapy, and I'm like, oh my God, she's here. So how can we find you, podcast, website, and so on?
So if you go to the website, therapyforblackgirls.com, you'll see links for the directory and all of the podcast episodes. You can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, wherever you find your podcast. And then all across social media, I am Therapy for Black Girls. But on Twitter, it's Therapy for the number 4 B Girls.
Okay. And your new headshots look great.
Yes, thank you.
I appreciate you. I appreciate the work that you do. I think, I say that I am a much better person because I go to therapy. Like, I'm certain that I am in a happy, healthy, loving, romantic relationship, and I have a child only because I was able to work with a therapist who was able to talk me out of the lies that I was telling myself. And those lies being, I'm just too busy. Relationships just aren't for me. I don't know anything about kids. Like, forced me to be honest with myself about what I wanted. And then working with me and encouraging me to do the work to have the kind of life that I have and not feel like I couldn't have it, because of these statistics and all of that stuff. And so I think, when I think about the many things that have attributed to my success, my therapist is right up in the top of just like, helping me every step of the way and just giving me that encouragement and, giving me a gold star when I don't, go off or melt down or cut somebody off. And so, I can't, I remember I reached out to you because someone said they saw you at my live podcast. I was like, what? Why didn't she say anything to me? So, and maybe you did because I was like 3 days pregnant and like a mess at that podcast, but, I appreciate you so much. And thank you for coming on. I don't know if you have anything that you may want to say, but I'll give you the floor and then we'll end it. Okay.
No. Yeah, that's a beautiful testimony. So I really think that speaks to the beauty of like how an amazing therapist can really change your life.
I agree. Dr. Joy, thank you so much.
Thank you.